comparing fractions. Comparing fractions is saying if the fraction on the left is less than, greater than, or equal to the fraction on the right based on the size that is shaded or unshaded. So for instance, I have two things, two shapes, and one is divided into, let's say, fourths. This would be one fraction, and I'm going to call that 1/4, or one shape. I'll call that 1/4. The next one, when I compare it, and this is important, all fractions need to start out with the same whole when you are comparing them. So say, for instance, I wanted to put this one in thirds, and I want to shade one part in. So 1/3. Now I'm going to set this up in a number sentence. 1/4 is blank, 1/3. Now, many students say that 1/4 is bigger because it's a bigger number than 3. That's true in the fact that there are more pieces in the top shape than there are in the bottom shape. The bottom shape, there are only 3 pieces. And so it has more pieces, but we're actually looking on the size of the shaded portion here. And you can also look at the unshaded part. There's more unshaded in the top than there is in the bottom. But if you look, 1/3 actually has more area of the entire shape covered. So that makes it larger, but we're reading from left to right. So we have 1/4 is less than, and I always teach a mnemonic device. Less than is in the same direction that the symbol is. So less than starts with an L, the symbol goes in that direction. 1/4 is less than 1/3 because it has less area shaded in. 1/4. So if you break it up into more pieces, you're going to have a smaller part. We have fractions on a number line. So here's my number line. And just as I used the rectangles above, a number line is very, very similar, except for it's just a line. So for instance, if we use 1/4 like we did above, we can place our tick marks in the same place. So instead of using a line, I'm going to use a dot to kind of separate this. What I can see with this number line is that from the beginning to the first point, I have that amount of space. That's my first part of the space. From the first dot to the second dot, there's my second part of the space. And I'm going to continue on. So if you look, I have 4 parts of the number line, and they're all divided, broken up by the tick marks that I have in the way of dots, or the points that are plotted. And so because I know that I have a full number line divided into 4 parts, I know that we're talking about fourths. So I'm going to start with 0. You could also call it 0/4. And then I'm going to continue to count on. So I have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4, or as we know it, 1. These are all fractions in between 0 and 1. And so now I have all of the fourths. And this is fractions on a number line. So if I'm comparing fractions that are closer to 0 are smaller than fractions that are closer to 1. So if we look at 1/4 here, we know that it's closer to 0 than, say, 3/4, which is closer to 1. So if I was writing a sentence, 1/4 is less than 3/4. I was going to write it that way. But if someone was asking me to compare 3/4 to 1/4, then I would say that 3/4 is greater because 3/4 is closer to 1. And so that's the justification. Now, if I took the same fraction and I wanted to break it up into thirds, I'm going to do that using this blue line here And so now we can say that this blue section here is now a third. And I'm going to use that to help guide me on the number line. Here's a third, and here's a third. And I can do it with dots too to make tick marks. And so therefore I can still start with 0 or 0 thirds. They are both 0. I have 1 third here, and I have 2 thirds here. So again, when I go to compare, the fraction that is closest to 0 is the smallest. So if I look at 1/4 versus 1/3, I know that 1/4 is smaller than 1/3 here. Now we're going to look at fractions of a set. So here I have 1/4 of 12 versus 1/3 of 12. Fractions of a set means that you have a total number of objects. The numerator tells you how many groups that you are looking for, and the denominator is telling you how many groups you need. So for 1/4 of 12, I know that I need 4 groups. So I'm just going to use circles this time. Here's my 4 groups, and I know that I want to equally divide 12 amongst my 4 groups because I want a fraction of 12. So I'm going to go count by, put 1 in each group until I get to the total of 12. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The top number, the numerator, tells me to look at 1 group. So if I look at 1 group, I can see that there are 3 inside of the 1 group. So 1/4 of 12, which could also be written like 1/4 times 12, is actually 3. It gives you 3 if I take 1/4 of it. Whereas 1/3 of 12 means that I need 3 groups, and it means I'm going to split 12 equally amongst 12 or 3 groups. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The top number tells me that I'm looking at 1 group out of all 3 groups. So when I look at 1 group, I can see there are 4 in the group. So again, even if we're comparing, we can see that 1/4 of 12 is 3, where 1/3 of 12 is 4. So again, 1/4 is less than 1/3. And that's comparing fractions using a number line, pictures, and of a set.